All right, so this was the big story of the week. And just off the top, I'm going to do something I don't usually do on this show and not talk so much, because with the wedding and with Keeneland in September, I'm a little bit out of the loop. So I'm going to let John take the lead on most of these topics. He's been a little bit more clued in than I am. And I'm just going to be your setup man, John, for most of this show. I hope you're okay with that.
Well, I mean, it colored me surprised. I'm a little not ready to handle this, but be that as it may, Joe, I will try to do my best Joe Bianca impression. And you know what? At the end of the show, I will probably have a greater appreciation for everything that you do, buddy.
I hope so. I also hope it's better than your previous Joe Bianca impression. That was that wasn't much. But this was the big story of the past week. I'm quoting from Natalie Voss's story in the Pollock Report. She always does a great job breaking down these stories. 2 reports released September 17th by the Horse Racing Integrity and Welfare Unit and the University of Kentucky on the ongoing investigations into the university's equine analytical chemistry lab were packed full of startling revelations. There was an investigation that HISA undertook into that lab, which is a pretty prominent lab in this industry. Both reports focused on the many alleged deficiencies of lab director Dr. Scott Stanley and raised broad, serious questions about the integrity of his operation. Officials say Stanley is now also under investigation by federal law enforcement authorities. And that the case has been referred to the University of Kentucky Police. In February, HIWU and the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority stopped sending samples to the UK lab for analysis after being alerted to personnel issues there. HIWU subsequently discovered that Stanley had charged them for a test he hadn't actually performed and alerted the university to this finding. The University of Kentucky, which was already looking into human resources issues with Stanley, then opened its own parallel investigations into the lab's activities. Basically, then there was like a lack of follow-up, I think, in terms of samples that were flagged for potentially having banned substances in them that they did not do, and then still charged HIWU anyway for them. I think there were like 90 something of them. But John, you really did the deep research on this story. Tell me what were like the big glaring takeaways from it.
Well, there were a bunch, Joe. So sit back, get your popcorn, and get ready. And again, a lot of this is being taken from the Natalie Voss article, who's editor in chief of the Pollock Report. I actually reached out to Natalie, and I was so impressed with what she did, how she broke down this 9-page report that was issued by HIWU, and so kudos to her, because she gave me a lot of these talking points. But basically, Joe, what it comes down to is Dr. Scott Stanley was in charge of one of the 6 or 7 designated labs that being utilized by HISA and HIWU, and for all intents and purposes, he was not doing his job. And he was not doing his job so much so that there were incorrect samples that were being tested. There were samples that were coming up as positives that he allegedly, again, we're not sure yet, but he allegedly was looking the other way and not splitting them for a split sample. There were others that where he was telling HISA, HIWU that he was doing the actual investigation and lab reports and wasn't really doing them. As a matter of fact, there's a quote in here that talks about the biggest problem, certainly, that although he claimed he was screening samples for EPO, he wasn't, because the machine he would have had to have used for the testing was inoperable, a fact that wasn't even communicated to HIWU. So he was saying he was doing some of these screenings, but in fact, he didn't have the capability to do the screenings. He also had access, allegedly, to some of the IT work that was going on, so he could log in and change answers as far as what some of the split samples were showing, whether positive or negative, and could do it anonymously. And other people within his organization could also log in anonymously and do the same thing. So kerfuffle that you used at the top of the show is a really good sentiment. I mean, it was a shit show, quite frankly, for a lot of it, and. Then there's also, Joe, some other issues as far as were there conflicts of interest from a personal standpoint. Dr. Scott Stanley, may or may not have been having a personal relationship with one of the employees that was there, who subsequently was also, by the way, the daughter was a former trainer and the daughter of an existing trainer, from Florida. And, oh, by the way, the UK lab was in charge of getting the Florida samples. So there was a lot of smoke, you would say, that could be fired down the road, that HISA HIWU were concerned about, the independent regulators were concerned about, and now UK is concerned about, quite frankly, because they're, he's basically tarnishing their good name with regard to testing and screening. So there's a lot going on here. Again, none of it yet is concrete as far as, did he break the law? Did he do anything immoral or inappropriate with regard to an HR standpoint? But there's a lot of dots that are being connected. So much so that UK themselves has said Dr. Scott Stanley, who is a tenured employee here, is being terminated. So that they must have a lot of evidence on it to go in that direction after tenuring an employee, for that long of a period of time. So a lot to unpack. I'm so happy that we're going to have Alan Foreman on in a few minutes to kind of address some of these issues and concerns. But Joe, one of the big things that I'm taking away from this personally is this is exactly why you have protocols in place to not only test but cross check certain samples and certain parts of the process in order to make sure that the testing center is doing exactly what it's doing. So yeah, it's unfortunate that a lab that HISA HIWU employed and was utilizing to screen samples is coming up with all of these issues, but that's exactly why they have a system in place. So that way, when it's being done and it's being done incorrectly, it's getting recognized immediately. That's a lot. I mean, there's other stuff about, whether or not Scott Stanley knew that the jig was up, and that's why he was being so combative towards the other employees, towards HIWU HISA, as far as, getting answers to them on a timely basis and things like that. I think the guy's in a bad way right now, and unfortunately, he kind of did it to himself.
Yeah, this is probably a better question for Alan Foreman, but I just wonder, how much of this is one rogue actor and how much of this is rotten infrastructure in the UK lab. I'm asking that question legitimately and with an open mind, because I don't know. In a lot of these cases, a lot of times when there's a big scandal, everybody tries to throw the one person who was the head of it under the bus,
right?
And then kind of just try to move on a little bit. So I'm curious as to whether he had people who kind of protected him or kept some of this stuff under wraps along the way, or if he truly was a rogue actor and because he was powerful within the organization and within the lab that he kind of just had his own way. So I'm really curious about that. HISA did a 6-month-long investigation into this. And again, this, it's a different topic, but it's similar to me to the Parks turf course we were talking about last week. Who else would have done this?
Right.
Who else in the industry would have done this and gotten to this point where now he's being referred for federal charges potentially? This is why you need cops on the beat. And just to reiterate some of what John said, I'm reading from the HISA press release here. Key findings of the 6-month-long investigation include the lab's failure to comply with mandatory testing specifications and instructions, including its standard operating procedures and sample analysis methods.
Is that important, Joe? Is that important for a lab to do?
I'm no scientist. I'm no scientician. But I think that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah. Also, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, you're good. They misrepresented, and John mentioned this, they misrepresented both their ability to test for specific substances, including EPO, and the completion of analysis for certain substances on specific samples. And at the direction of Dr. Scott Stanley, the laboratory failed to perform confirmatory analysis on 91 samples whose initial screening showed the potential presence of a prohibited substance and therefore required follow-up, instead reporting the samples as negative. Right. That's a big blaring
Yep.
It really does make you question the integrity of the entire lab. And I don't want to do that. I'm sure there are plenty of great scientists there who are trying to do the right thing, but man, is that scary, especially in this era where we're really trying to crack down and make sure that things are adjudicated correctly and that we have a clean sport and a level playing field. This is going to be tough to climb out of this hole from, but that's why I'm happy to talk to Alan Foreman and see, if he thinks this was an institutional thing or a guy in charge who shouldn't have been in charge screwing shit up. So we are so thrilled to bring on this next guest to explain some of the legal ramifications of the story we talked about in the opening segment. He's the CEO of the Thoroughbred Horsemen Association, one of the leading legal minds in the business. Alan Foreman, welcome to the show.
Gentlemen, thank you. Happy to be here.
We're so glad to have you, and you do a great service, I think, when these kind of stories break and jump on podcasts and explain to us laymen what's going on in the business. So obviously, I'm sure you dove into the UK lab story a little bit. John has a little bit better grasp on this than I do, but my main question and the main takeaway for me is just from your perspective, is this a one rogue actor kind of screwing things up for the entire lab? Does it seem to you more like an institutional problem? What's your read on that?
No, it comes from the top, because the director of the laboratory is responsible for the activities, conduct, compliance with protocols, and how that laboratory operates. I mean, it's a sad story, but it's a good news story for the industry, actually, notwithstanding that we have a lab that has to shut down and that we have to step in and get it right. I spoke at the Jockey Club Roundtable in 2009, and I called for the industry to take a fresh look at its entire drug testing program, laboratory accreditation, which did not exist at the time. If you go back 15 years, we didn't have an accreditation program. I said, we need to get our labs accredited. We need to upgrade the quality of the personnel who are doing it. And we have to give confidence both to the industry and to the betting public that we are doing everything we can to ensure the integrity of the sport and the safety and welfare of the horse. And so we worked very hard to develop an accreditation program for our laboratories, which led to the creation of the RMTC code, which at the time, and I still believe, is the best in the industry. I mean, the international laboratory did not have a code such as we had developed for the horse racing industry here. The key is, though, that you've got to be able to test your laboratories, and you have to have the confidence on an ongoing basis that the laboratories can do what you want them to do, and the laboratories can do what they say they can do. And you need to have a strict program to test them. Now, in this particular instance, there was a whistleblower. There were concerns from one of the other laboratories about their interactions with this laboratory. And then when HISA went in to actually take a look at this program, they found that it was non-compliant in so many ways that it had to be shut down immediately. And it's sad from the standpoint that I've known Scott Stanley for 4 decades and have always regarded him as one of the brightest of members of our scientific community. He's not only a recognized equine toxicologist, but he's also a pharmacologist. And having both of those skill sets in the laboratory is very difficult to find. But what happened in this laboratory is untenable. The good news is that we have a process in place to identify this, to root it out, and to fix it. And for the best interest of the industry to know that that laboratory was not compliant and will not operate until it is compliant and can meet the standards and protocols is critically important. And that's one of the good things about this new HISA program, is that there is somebody looking at these supposedly qualified laboratories to ensure that they are, in fact, following protocols, even to the extent that they went in and to the extent that there were concerns about samples that had not been properly tested, or samples that may have produced either false negatives or false positives. HISA was able to go in and test every one of those samples to ensure that there were no corrupt samples, that the integrity of the sport had not been damaged, and that there can be assurances going forward that, number one, the samples are going to laboratories that are compliant, but that before this lab can get up and running and do testing for our industry, that they're going to be compliant with protocols. So it just shows that this new HISA program, which regulates our laboratories, is working.
And Alan, you bring up some excellent points that it's important to be able to cross-check and test and see exactly what our labs are doing to ensure the integrity of them. Because I'm sure that there are trainers and owners out there right now who may have had a positive sample, especially if the sample was sent to Kentucky, and they may be questioning whether or not the results are accurate. What can you say to those about those tests?
Well, first of all, with respect to a trainer who gets notice of a positive test, he or she does have the opportunity to get the B sample tested. That sample goes to another RMTC code and HISA approved laboratory for testing the same sample to see if, in fact, the drug that reported was in the sample. So that's one of the fallbacks. The other thing that the industry does, that HISA does, is we test these laboratories on a regular basis, sending them samples that are included with other samples that go to the laboratory, and they have to test them to determine if they can find what is in that sample. HISA knows what's in the sample. The RMTC knows what's in the sample, but the laboratory doesn't. And they are tested frequently to determine whether or not they have the protocols, the standards, and the ability to identify those. And, we recently had a RMTC code accredited laboratory doing testing for HISA that failed these routine tests, these routine scrutinies. And as a result, their accreditation was suspended. And until they take corrective action and can demonstrate that they are able to not only meet the standards and protocols, but can identify samples are sent to them, they're not going to be doing testing for our industry. And so that's something that we're doing on an ongoing basis and will continue to do so to ensure the integrity of our testing process. So there are, and thirdly, when a trainer has a positive test, you can look at the analytical data. You do need an expert to look at it to ensure that they did follow the protocols, that the sample wasn't tampered with, that the sample was properly tested, that the result reported by the laboratory was correct. And you can look at it's extensive data, but you can look at it, and an expert looking at those can determine whether or not they followed standard protocols or not. And I'm sure that HISA looks and HIWU look at that data before they proceed with a case to determine whether or not there's anything that's questionable with respect to the sample. So I think that the bottom line is I think the Horsemen can take comfort, and I think the industry can take comfort that there is a mechanism in place that ensures the integrity of the testing process. That's the most important take from this.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's a scandal, but the fact that there was even an investigative process to begin with to produce this scandal, I think, is what you're saying, that's a positive step for the industry, because a lot of this stuff probably would have gone ignored in previous, or not even been reported in previous eras. I wanted to switch gears to another story that broke last week. There was a veterinarian in Illinois who filed a lawsuit in federal court alleging that Hawthorne and other officials there allowed horses they knew to be sick, injured, or lame to run in races over a 2-year period. In approximately 75 racing dates, Hawthorne officials deny the allegations. Illinois Racing Board said it found no evidence to support the allegations, but the plaintiff, who's Dr. Christine Tuma, said that defendants intentionally violated federal and state laws when they certified lame and sick horses to race while abusing the animals in their care and defrauding the betting public. Two-part question. First, your lawyer hat on, do you think there's any merit to this suit from what you've read? Second, put your horseman's hat on. There is a lot of push and pull now in the industry with vets having more power and more autonomy to scratch horses. Here at West Point, we've had some horses scratch who had nothing wrong with them, but you kind of got to just play by the rules. The increased scrutiny overall is a good thing. So on the legal side, does this have merit? And on the horseman's side, do you think that we can reach a point where vets have a little bit too much power?
Well, with respect to the lawsuit itself, I only know what I read. I think it was an article in TDN. I know nothing more about it. It seems to me to be a novel approach to be going into federal court and bringing this action under what is the federal racketeering statute that was, as I think reported in the article, originally used to go after mob bosses, but has obviously gone beyond that. I mean, it was used in the prosecution of Donald Trump in New York. And I think there is a ultimate question of whether or not this statute was, created for this purpose. I mean, they're making allegations of a connection to betting and to nefarious conduct, fraud. I mean, I have a hard time believing that the conduct for which she complains, there's more to this story, obviously, that meets the eye. She says she complained to federal regulators. I assume she's talking about HISA because the safety program was in place. You have to be very impressed with the people at HISA, Jen Durenberger, Ann McGovern, and their team in looking at these kinds of allegations, this situation. I will tell you that right now the industry has been erring on the side of the safety and welfare of the horse. And yeah, there's been a lot of complaints about horses being scratched unnecessarily, but we don't have a margin of error. We haven't had a margin of error. The single most important story coming out of this industry, in my opinion, right now, is the massive reduction in the fatality rate that's occurred in the past year. And I think it's occurred for two reasons. Number one is we have a mandated safety program that the Mid-Atlantic had a terrific safety program. We couldn't mandate it by law. California had a terrific program. Kentucky, it's now a national program, and the standards are tough. We've obviously are taking greater scrutiny of the condition of our horses. And yeah, there are horses where the veterinarians are erring on the side of caution. And that can create some heartburn for owners who are waiting to get a horse into a race, or trainers who believe the horse is okay. But that is, that's what's happening right now. And yeah, do I think it will relax? Maybe to some extent, because I think what they want is uniformity among the veterinarians in the methodologies that they're using to scratch horses. Why is a horse scratched in one place but not scratched in another? Is it dependent upon the subject rather than the objective standards of the veterinarian looking at the horse? But at the end of the day, the single most important story is that our fatality and breakdown rate is really significantly coming down. And I think the other reason for that is, some horsemen may disagree, but I'm hearing it more and more, backing out the administration of therapeutic medications from what was 24 hours to 48 hours and now even a longer period of time is giving the veterinarians a better opportunity to examine these horses to make sure that they don't have something that would cause that horse not to, be put in the starting gate. And I think it's causing the horsemen to take a greater look at and do a better job of training their horses. And I come from the horseman side of the business, but I'm hearing a lot of that. And I just think the combination of the safety program and backing out the use of these medications is a contributing factor to this reduced fatality rate, which is so critical to our future.
No, excellent points, Alan. And you look at the numbers year over year of the improvement of safety, and HISA is a big part of that. Obviously, that Joe and I talk about that all the time. But especially in stark contrast to the states that aren't following HISA, and that leads me to my question about the constitutionality of HISA. If you can explain it, like dumb it down so I can understand, as far as Fifth Circuit, Sixth Circuit, Supreme Court, where are we right now, and what should people be listening for as far as the higher courts?
So we're on the verge of the constitutionality of HISA going to the United States Supreme Court. It's inevitable. I think the question right now is, because we're waiting for the Fifth Circuit to issue its mandate, will its mandate limit the scope of its ruling? And in the Fifth Circuit, they determined that HISA was constitutional in every respect except for its enforcement power. And you need to remember that the Fifth Circuit has always been problematic with respect to the constitutionality of HISA. They originally deemed it to be unconstitutional. Congress went back, made the fix that the Fifth Circuit has suggested needed to be made, and yet it comes back to the Fifth Circuit and they continue to reject it. They're hostile to HISA. And in this instance, they didn't disagree with the Sixth Circuit, including Kentucky, where the court ruled that the new language did render it constitutional. They found it unconstitutional as to the Federal Trade Commission's oversight of the enforcement arm and the enforcement powers of HISA. So that is the issue that's going to go to the Supreme Court. Now, the question is, will they issue an injunction, so to speak, where its application will only apply to the states covered by the Fifth Circuit, Louisiana, Texas, or will they issue a national injunction, in which case it would cripple HISA across the board? What HISA attempted to do over the past week was to seek permission to go to the Supreme Court, get permission for the Supreme Court to take the case so that they wouldn't issue, in my opinion, a national mandate. And the Fifth Circuit said, no way, we're going to rule. And then if you want to go to the Supreme Court, you can go to the Supreme Court. And so the question now is, what will the Fifth Circuit do? I believe if they issue a national mandate, HISA will go to the Supreme Court immediately and ask for a stay. So there's a lot of jockeying going on right now. And the question is, how quickly will it get to the Supreme Court? The Supreme Court's new term starts in a few weeks. We'll go till June. Conventional wisdom is if they can get the case to the court now, we would have a ruling by next summer. If not, it gets delayed further. And so it's complicated, but I think that both sides are starting to gear up for the fight before the Supreme Court. And we will, conceivably we'll know this time next year, and it's the whole ball of wax. I mean, there's going to be no more litigation after this. It's either constitutional or it's not constitutional. And if it's not, will the powers that be able to go back to Congress in this atmosphere? Mitch McConnell will not be the majority leader, or he won't be the minority leader. He will not be in power. He helped to push it through. Chuck Schumer may or may not be majority leader. If the Republicans take the Senate, somebody else will. So who knows how the politics of this will work going forward. It's going to be a real challenge for the industry.
Yeah, no, I was hoping that you would hold our hands and tell us it's going to be okay, but it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. And
you know what? When you hear the argument before the Supreme Court, you'll get a pretty good sense. I think that many people feel that three of the justices are hostile to the administrative state. The others aren't. Kavanaugh got the appeal from the Sixth Circuit, the appeal from the losing side that wanted a stay, and they wanted to go to the Supreme Court, wanted to stay. They didn't get it. So the sense is maybe Kavanaugh is sympathetic to HISA. You expect probably the liberal justices will. Who knows where John Roberts is, and who knows where Justice Barrett is. Is that Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas will be hostile, and maybe no votes, but maybe no more than three. So
yeah. With this Supreme Court, I find it hard to believe that in the majority they're going to back a regulatory agency. I cannot see that happening, but hopefully I'm wrong. We'll see. Last question from me. You do such a service for the industry. You're obviously such a passionate guy and a smart guy, and you've had a great influence in the business. I think one of the things that you've done in the past year or so that on paper, at least, was really important and really necessary was one of the big criticisms of HISA when it first started making rulings was that a lot of trainers who had rulings levied against them felt kind of steamrolled and as if they did not have a real say in the legal process or the appeals process. You offered yourself up to be an ombudsman for HISA and to work between the two sides to come up with a more fleshed out, more fair process. My first question is, have people been taking advantage of it? And secondly, have you been seeing better, more satisfying results for the people who are, have been caught with alleged illegal substances through that process?
So I talk to horsemen every day, sometimes more than others. Sometimes the cases are more difficult than others. What I essentially do is help horsemen navigate the process. They get this 11-page letter from HISA, from HIWU that is, it's daunting, and they're not going to sit and read through it. So they're told to call me. They call me. I help them to understand the process, how to navigate the process, what to do, whether they should seek legal assistance, whether I can help them with pro bono legal assistance, free legal assistance, whether I can help them to fashion their response to HIWU, whether they should request the B sample. I mean, there are any number of things I do to help them. It's confidential. They don't get charged for my services, and I'm happy to do it. In the more difficult banned substance cases, it's a real challenge. Fortunately, we're not seeing many of those. In response to your second point, the answer is yes, there are changes being made, and it's not an easy process. I advocate for horsemen, and I advocate for change, as many others are doing. But we have seen change. You see it in the fact that a lot of the banned substances have been these drugs of human substance abuse that are finding their way into horses. Originally, that was a 2-year suspension and a $25,000 fine. We've been able to bring that down now to a rule before the Federal Trade Commission that would have a maximum penalty of 60 days, but you can mitigate that down. I've gotten them to look at any number of issues that there's other changes coming. And, we don't talk about it. You don't see it. I see it in talking to horsemen's groups. I see it talking to horsemen. I have the ability to talk to HIWU. I have the ability to talk to HISA. We do it respectfully. There's a process in place with committees and lots of people with differing points of view. They don't always agree with what I have to say. But but the system is working. if there's a problem, it's that the Federal Trade Commission is taking so long to approve the changes that we want. Right. I mean, we can't implement the changes. We thought this was going to be, we being the industry, I'm not a spokesman for HISA or HIWU, but the theory behind this, the thinking behind this was that it would expedite a process that what people thought before HISA was a drawn-out process. You couldn't get all the jurisdictions involved. It took too long to adopt rules. And now we've got a process that isn't moving quickly as it comes to rulemaking. And we have to answer to the Federal Trade Commission, and we have to wait for them to decide when they want to approve a rule. Right. That's not what we contemplated. So that's been the hard part of it. I can't compliment Lisa Lazarus enough for the almost impossible job that she's doing. And I interact with the people at HISA and HIWU every day. They know what their mandate is. They are sensitive to industry concerns. They listen to me. I don't always, I'm not always successful in what I ask for, but, that to have the opportunity to do that, continue to talk to them is, I think, critically important for the industry. And I know, and John knows from the THA perspective, we're at the table with them. They come to our meetings. We talk to them. We express our concerns. We talk to them about what's happening on the backstretch, what Horsemen are telling us, what we think is working, what is not working, how we can make it better. And has always been our position is it's better to be at the table than to be trying to fight this process. Because let's assume that the opponents of HISA are successful. What are we going to do? Where is this industry going to go? And is that going to be good or bad for the industry? And, I would rather be working within a system, trying to make it better. And in a lot of respects, what's happening with HIWU and HISA is not terribly different than what we had before. It's just uniform. It's transparent. And everybody, we're all trying to, I know, are trying to get to the right place. And there are changes that still need to be made. And we'll work through that. It's still a young program.
Alan, can't thank you enough for the time and the expertise. We'd love to have you on retainer, not as a lawyer, but to explain these things to us.
Steve Bick does with me. I'm on.
Yeah.
Steve wanted me this morning. I said, Steve, I'm slammed all day. He said, can I have you tomorrow morning? So I'll be on Steve tomorrow morning. And
we got to get this show out to beat
but
Steve.
You were here first. You were here first, which is all the most important.
It's a good opportunity to get some of this stuff out there so people can understand what's going on.
Yeah, no doubt. And nobody does it better than you. So thank you for the time and keep up the great work.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm available anytime. And you're doing a great job. I love the podcast. I really do. I told John that.
We like to think we're the Alan Foreman of podcasters.
Let's
not go crazy, John.